Chapter 146. The Remnant 3. The Annihilation Hammer Jigalath was a giant hammer. Its power also suited its shape. When its owner swung the hammer downward, the sky would collapse. It wasn't a metaphor, the sky actually would collapse. It was always night in Helmuth because the sun was very dim. On top of that, Helmuth's night sky had a heavy concentration of demonic energy. The Annihilation Hammer could control the demonic energy in the sky and direct it with its swings. With just a downward swing of the Annihilation Hammer, its owner could bring forth night's descent. The Demon King of Carnage was ranked number 5, but if only physical strength was considered, he was stronger than the Demon Kings ranked higher than him. The remnant here today was also strong, though it was not the Demon King himself. As Uad swung the Annihilation Hammer, he guided the darkness that drifted through the forest to fall down in unison. Dominic staggered to his feet. His arms were crushed and a large hole could be seen in the middle of his torso. However, his wounds recovered quickly. They were covered in scales again, and even the hole in his body was filled up with scales. As he breathed in a bizarre manner, Dominic thrust the demon's spear into the ground. He was using Spear Forest. The darkness underneath Eugene's feet expanded and hundreds of thorns soared up. His current attack was precise, incomparable to the time when Dominic had used Spear Forest with the council head's arm. Darkness was falling from the sky and thorns soared from underneath Eugene's feet. However, neither was enough to make Eugene panic or even take a step back. He held the Moonlight Sword in his right hand and the Holy Sword in his left hand. Then he swung them together. The pale moonlight and the glorious holy fire blended together, ripping apart the sky that had fallen because of the Annihilation Hammer and crushing the thorns underneath his feet. Eugene also began using the ring flame formula in addition to ignition, making a circle with his overloaded cores. Inside the cloak of darkness, Mare felt Eugene's spinning cores and his exponentially amplifying mana. She also knew about the ring flame formula, but she wasn't aware of this brainlessly overtaxing technique. After intentionally overloading his cores, he accelerated his heart to keep up with the fiercely moving mana. But that wasn't the end. He made every muscle fiber in his body hold the mana. Could he have lost his mind? Mare thought. Trembling, Mare looked at Eugene's overloaded mana running wild. No sane person would use this kind of technique. Of course they wouldn't. The technique's use shortened Eugene's lifespan. The more his cores were overloaded, the more they weakened. No one knew when his unstable, fast-beating heart would stop. His stimulated body, which was forced to follow the torrent of mana, would also be worn out. That was the logical outcome. But he is controlling it perfectly. Mare was beyond surprised. The World Tree spirits that had blended themselves in Eugene's body didn't just mix lightning in his mana to create the lightning flame. As the spirits naturally merged into his body, they strengthened his cores and contained the intensified explosions within one great circle. The lightning flame wasn't the sole reason why he was capable of such a feat 300 years ago. Even Sienna had been shocked by Eugene's understanding and control of mana. After getting to know the lightning flame in minute detail, Eugene then proceeded to use it to upgrade the white flame formula and ignition to more complete forms. Without ignition, Eugene couldn't properly control the lightning flash. The reason was simple. His body wasn't able to keep up with the lightning flash's speed. However, he could perfectly control Lightning Flash if he used ignition. From the start, he had created Lightning Flash to replace ignition by completely eliminating its associated risks. "I will trust you to defend me," Eugene coldly spoke as he lowered his stance. He wasn't just saying it to Mare but also talking to Tempest. The Wind Spirit King stood up behind Eugene and nodded. Although Mare couldn't dare to stick her head out of the cloak, she clenched her fists, determined. Dozens of defensive barriers were cast, completely under Mare's control. Stirring up a great gust of wind, Tempest pushed away the darkness. This battlefield was the worst for Tempest. The forest was already under his enemy's control, and the darkness blocked his wind. Yet he didn't shrink in fear. He was the Wind Spirit King, so he didn't feel intimidated by the residue of his hateful enemy remaining in the darkness. He wasn't intimidated because one of the heroes from 300 years ago was standing in front of him. The world remembered him as the stupid Hamel, but Tempest knew how much of a dreadful nightmare the human named Hamel was for demon folk. At that time, demon folk were more worried about Hamel than the owner of the Holy Sword, Vermouth, on the battlefield. Hamel had no mercy. There was one person who killed more monsters, demonic beasts and demon folk on the battlefield than Vermouth, Hamel. What he was doing was not fighting in a war but perpetrating a massacre. You will be able to. Tempest's wind pushed Eugene forward. Your reincarnated self will be able to settle the old scores that even Vermouth couldn't. Tempest's hurricane still wanted to go north, so it couldn't end in a place like this. Eugene felt Tempest's strong will. Settle old scores that even Vermouth couldn't deal with. His words made Eugene laugh. Vermouth wasn't the only one who had accrued old debts and didn't get to pay them. Everyone who wandered around the Devildom wished to settle those debts. You guys, Eugene spoke as the moonlight sword in his right hand lit up. The incomplete moonlight sword consumed a great amount of his mana, maybe because it needed to make up for its lack of power. When he first held the sword at Hamel's grave in Nahama, he could only swing it a couple of times, but now? Are already way past the line. The moonlight sword shone brighter still. When he swung the sword, its light filled up the crooked crescent moon, making it into a half moon. And that still wasn't enough. Turning around in a full circle, Eugene swung the moonlight sword once more. The trajectory of the sword now drew the shape of a full moon. That is why you can't block this, Eugene declared. The filled-up full moon scattered away. All-consuming light flooded the entire forest. Dominic didn't know what the sword in front of him was. Although the moonlight sword had been sealed deep underground in Helmuth, even the demon king of carnage didn't know what it was. The moonlight sword was pure destruction in the shape of a sword. Every thorn from Spear Forest that Dominic had cast using the demon spear was crushed. With every beam of light touching him, his body was destroyed, and every time more scales covered his body. Dominic's consciousness became faint as he went through this process multiple times. It was becoming faint, but it didn't mean he was unconscious. No longer under Dominic's control, his body moved even more sharply and precisely. The remnant in the demon's spear led Dominic. He wasn't using his skills anymore. What am I? Dominic absent-mindedly thought. With blank eyes he looked forward. Every time a shining light brushed past him, his body shook greatly, but it didn't hurt. What am I doing here? He remembered stabbing his grandfather from behind. He had pierced the heart, twisted the sword, and held his grandfather's collapsing body. His grandfather had pulled out the demon's spear to counterattack, but he hadn't used it in the end. He had just turned back, looking at Dominic in disbelief. Dominic had enjoyed the look on Doine's face. The council head had thought Dominic would obediently become his heir, huh? Well, in a way, the council head ruled over the entire Lionheart clan. If Eugene Lionheart hadn't shown up, Dominic would have dreamt of becoming the head and been satisfied with his seat. There was one reason for the Council of Elders to be stronger than the main house. The council head, Doine's Lionheart. He was positioned higher up in the Lionheart family tree than any other main family member. He was also a man of talent, recognized by everyone in the clan. However, Dominic couldn't be his grandfather. He wasn't certain whether he would be treated as the Lionheart's highest elder and martial arts master when he was old enough to become the Council of Elders head like his grandfather. Why? Right before his consciousness faded away, one question filled Dominic's head. Why am I dying? The answer to Dominic's question was simple. Eugene had killed him with his sword. No matter how bizarre and brilliant spearmanship Dominic showed with his forearms, Eugene already knew every skill he used. The remnant didn't have an ego. How hard could it be to fight against a person who only relied on another's memory to use skills? The hero's fight against the Demon King of Cruelty had continued for 3 days. Hamel and Vermouth had stood on the front lines and dealt with the Demon King's spear. It was impossible for Eugene to forget the fight, so he knew how Dominic would move. He knew in which direction he should deflect Dominic's attack and where to aim in order to cut Dominic. If the Moonlight Sword by itself did not suffice to fight the Demon King, Eugene could use it with enough proficiency so it would suffice. Everything happened in a flash. Right after Euid flew up to the sky and swung the Annihilation Hammer downward, Dominic's mind was destroyed. It didn't take long for Eugene to cut off Dominic's every arm and slit his stomach. Eugene passed by Dominic, but the dead Dominic stood up behind him. Dominic's mind was already corroded and destroyed by the remnant, his body irreparably damaged. However, the scales connected and filled up his horrendously damaged body. Looking at Dominic being stitched together once more, Euid laughed. Controlling a corpse was a taboo even in black magic, But Yuet enjoyed committing this taboo that he should never have committed. Mother. Yuet thought of Tanis and everyone in the Basar family. He wondered if everyone had rotted by now. They probably had. At the time, Yuet wasn't a black wizard, so he couldn't make proper undead out of the corpses. The best he could do was kill them without leaving a scar, and control them very carefully using his darkness. He really didn't want to break them. Magic is. Trembling with excitement, Yuet moved his hands. So cool and fun. The darkness spirits creepily shrieked, and the darkness resonated with their screams as they crowded around Yuet. Moving his finger, Yuet drew a formula with blood-red light on the darkness. The darkness that hovered around Eugene turned into numerous hands. They all reached out to Eugene, trying to grab him. Avoiding their grips, Eugene swung the moonlight sword and the holy sword simultaneously. Meanwhile, the monster's face was covered with scales. With a squealing sound, the monster thrust the demon's spear into the ground. Once again, darkness spread underneath Eugene. Thorns soared up, turning the ground into a forest of spears. However, Eugene stood in the center and scathed. Whoosh! Turning full circle, Eugene crushed the thorns and took a step back as he lifted his cloak. With his black magic, Yuet tried to pressure the space around Eugene to suffocate him. Ack! Mare groaned in Eugene's head. Yuet's magic was tenacious and ominous, just like a curse. Using the barriers, Mare stopped Yuet, then analyzed the formula and dispelled Yuet's magic. Eugene had said that he was going to trust Mare and Tempest to defend him. And that was what he was going to do. When he turned his head, Eugene could see the staggering Dominic. Eugene had killed him several times, but Dominic still stood up. Do I have to turn him into ash to finish him off? Eugene wondered. Although he could spare a part of his mana, it was a waste to infuse enough mana in the Moonlight Sword to reduce Dominic to ashes. I can't waste it on a corpse. He pulled out the Thunderbolt Pronoa. It had previously consumed a significant amount of his mana, but he now had the Lightning Flame. Ever since he had acquired that, Eugene could greatly reduce his mana waste, enabling him to continuously fire the Thunderbolt with little mana. PZZZ. He didn't even need to draw the bow. The waving lightning flame held up the thunderbolt as the bolts of lightning from the flame became its arrows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 15 lightning bolts were now ready to fire. Eugene shot them out all at once. Boom, 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 boom. Amid the loud sound and the blindingly bright light, Dominic's body was crushed and began to scatter away. Moving forward, Eugene swung the holy sword. Under the sword's holy fire, Dominic's entire body crumbled to dust, leaving no trace behind. However, the demon's spear remained. Ignoring the demon's spear which had fallen on the ground, Eugene jumped up. With the giant magic circle behind his back, Yuet was holding the Annihilation Hammer high. Haha. Yuet burst into laughter and swung the Annihilation Hammer downward. Rumbly. The intense air current made by the Annihilation Hammer rushed over Eugene. Numerous hands came out of the darkness underneath Eugene, trying to grab him. The magic circle behind Yuet rippled, and a set of giant hands emerged from within the circle. Then, as if they were Yuet's wings, the hands opened wide and grabbed his body from behind, appearing like giant folded wings. Nice to see you, Eugene spat. He knew those hands. The hands were made from the Demon King of Carnage's black magic. Even though Hamel had attacked with all his might, he had found it difficult to slash off even one finger. There were 10 fingers in total, each with its own magical ability. The Demon King had simply moved a finger here and there, but it was enough to bombard the hero's party with powerful magic. The demonic energy led by the Annihilation Hammer was weighing down on Eugene's entire body as if it would crush him. The barriers under Mare's control shattered one by one. As Tempest supported Eugene's body, he tried to countervail the Annihilation Hammer's power, but his storms scattered away as the darkness began to mix itself in the storms. Eugene put the thunderbolt back inside the cloak. The pressuring energy was strong but not enough to bend his back. As Eugene glanced at Yuet, he saw the latter looking down at him, using the giant hands to shield his entire body. He was smiling as if he was certain of his victory. He looked ridiculous. What had Yuet done ever since the fight had begun? Well, he had made several smart moves. Isolating this space with darkness and stopping the Black Lions from joining the fight was pretty smart. Making Cyan Seal and the others their hostages earlier was also smart. However, that was it. He had signed a contract with the darkness spirit, the remnant of the demon kings. After that he could do so many things such as controlling the darkness in this place, using the annihilation hammer properly, and using high-ranked black magic by resonating with the remnants. But he didn't. This is all he can do, Eugene concluded. Swinging the annihilation hammer, grabbing opponents with a bunch of hands, making thorns with the demon's spear. You had used various spells aside from these things, but he did it pretty clumsily considering how powerful the Demon King's skills had been originally. PCCZ. Eugene's lightning flowed, and the blazing mane generated by the white flame formula fluttered in the air. The layer of demonic energy created by the annihilation hammer was broken through. With his eyes dyed with darkness, Yu had accurately perceived what had happened in front of him. The layer of demonic energy was penetrated when the moonlight sword shone. Without delay, Eugene approached the giant hands. Arriving in front of them, he turned his waist and pulled out the holy sword. He first cut the fingers with the holy sword, then attacked the weakened fingers with the moonlight sword. Yu had gasped. The fingers that shielded his body were cut apart. The darkness that had previously risen up flowed down like blood. Yu had looked down at his collapsing body, but he saw something weird. Of course it was weird. Eugene's attacks from above had cut Yu in half. Yu had screamed as he felt horrible pain. The darkness near him burst continuously. The magic circle was distorted. It hurts. Why? Yu was bisected at the abdomen. Am I going to die? He wasn't going to die. The darkness reconnected his body, even replacing Yu's blood, making Yu whole once again. I will kill you, Yu stutteringly said, wiggling his fingers. Using the set of giant hands, he started bombarding Eugene with magic. His attack was ferocious and fierce, very much unlike Yu's usual self. Wrapping himself in a mana shield, Eugene broke through Yu's magic attacks. He wasn't just relying on the mana shield. Tempest's raging wind pushed away Yu's magic while Mare intercepted the rest. Arg. Holding the annihilation hammer, Yu sprung out at Eugene. The floating set of giant hands flicked a finger in Eugene's direction. Boom. The explosion affected him, but Eugene didn't let it show. Instead, he stepped forward without stopping. Then he swung the moonlight sword powered by the explosive ignition. Bang. The annihilation hammer and the moonlight sword clashed. Eugene didn't have enough power to cut down Yu. If he went head-to-head with Yu, he would certainly be at a disadvantage. So instead of trying to fight against Yu's power, Eugene used Yu's momentum to turn around and shove the holy sword, which he pulled out from the cloak, into the gaps between the giant fingers wrapped around Yu. Ok. Eugene slit Yu's throat, but he couldn't cut the head off. He only cut it halfway. As Eugene had expected, no blood came out of Yu's throat and his brother could still speak clearly. Screaming at the top of his lungs, Yu brandished the annihilation hammer and blindly fired different magic attacks. Thump. Eugene hadn't stopped using ignition, but he was already starting to feel the rebound. Although he pursed his lips tightly, blood was oozing out from the corner of his lips. His speed slowed down for a moment. Tempest and Mare focused on defending Eugene, but the annihilation hammer broke through their defense, smashing Eugene's left arm. Yu saw Eugene's left arm bleeding. If he had been a little stronger, he would have ripped off Eugene's arm. Although Yu hadn't managed that, Eugene had to be experiencing a lot of pain. Besides, Eugene couldn't recover his wounds, unlike Yu. It hurts. Right. You can cry if you want to. Even scream if you want. Yu chortled. Grow a pair, said Eugene. What? If you can't man up and you think this kind of injury is something to cry about, wear a diaper, you fucking baby, Eugene smirked as he came up close to Yu. Eugene was holding the moonlight sword, but Yu couldn't see the terrifying moonlight. What is that sword? Yu thought, unable to understand what Eugene was holding right now. Still, he didn't care because he was definitely going to get Eugene at this distance. He wasn't lowering his guard as he hated getting hurt. The fingers covered Yu's body, creating a more secure cocoon, and another magic circle appeared on top of the previous giant magic circle behind Yu. Why? Yu asked inside his mind. The darkness pulled him toward it. What do you mean by avoid it? That thing is just a stick. The spirit delivered a warning in a faint voice. Don't order me around. I can do this on my own. Trust me, I will feed you that guy myself. The fight that seemed everlasting finally stopped when the moonlight sword touched the giant set of hands that protected Yued, exploding the moonlight. Chapter 147. The Remnant 4. The moonlight seeped in from between the gaps of the giant hands. A demon king was a mythical being with powers that lived up to their name. 300 years ago, even Vermouth couldn't rip apart the demon king of cruelty when he launched a direct frontal attack using the moonlight sword. On top of that, Eugene's moonlight sword was significantly weaker than Vermouth's. If the demon king of carnage had used any magic right now, it would have been impossible for Eugene to use the current moonlight sword to rip apart the demon king's magic with a direct frontal attack. Yued looked forward with wide eyes. He felt like hundreds, thousands of ants were crawling on the surface of his brain. Those marching ants suddenly dug their way into the center of his brain, messing with Yued's mind. Someone else's memory deranged Yued's brain, but he didn't know whose memory this was. It showed Eugene wrapped in white flames. His flame overloaded abruptly, but he wasn't using a technique pertaining to the Lionheart's white flame formula. He used the technique that he had used earlier while dodging Dominic's attacks as he had toyed with Dominic. It took more than a genius to develop that kind of advanced skill. Yued saw a scene he had never seen before in his life. Wrapped in white flames, a man swung the holy sword. In fact, he used multiple swords. Sometimes he used the holy sword, but he also swung the moonlight sword. Over time his clothes and movements changed. But there was something that never changed. Another man who fought beside the man with the holy sword. This second man, covered with scars, wasn't wrapped in flames, but he kept fighting nonetheless. No matter how ruthless the enemy's attack was, he didn't stop. Every time his weapon shattered, he would pick up another from the ground. Some attacks seemed impossible to dodge, but the man avoided them somehow. That wasn't the end, he even made counterattacks. Slowly, the memory from the distant past overlapped with the present. That was when Yued realized. The man full of scars was none other than Eugene Lionheart. "Och!" Yued screamed in pain. His pain was greater than his shock from realizing the truth about his adopted brother. The moonlight that had seeped in through the gaps of the giant hands destroyed Yued's magic. Directly facing the light, Yued's body began to fall apart. He used the Demon King's magic, but its power was not as great as when the Demon King used it himself. "Does it hurt?" Eugene blurted out, shoving the moonlight sword further into the gap between the fingers of the giant hands. His left arm was crushed. He also didn't expect he would be hit by Ignition's rebound in this critical moment. Still, he didn't think he was unlucky. It had only cost Eugene an arm to take care of a Demon King's remnant. Besides, his left arm hadn't even been cut off. The bones in his left arm were just shattered and the flesh around the bones had been crushed. He would recover without a scar. He felt pain, but his injury wasn't painful enough to make him scream. Even when Eugene, no, Hamel had died with a hole in his chest, he hadn't screamed even once. This kind of injury was nothing to him. "I'm pretty sure the Patriarch's broken heart hurts more." Eugene bitterly looked at Yued. He couldn't consider Gilead a great patriarch or father. However, the man tried his best and Eugene thought he was rather unfortunate. If Gilead had been a more active parent, Yued wouldn't have fallen this far. Gilead was a sloppy father and Tanis was a greedy mother. If only, Yued stuttered out a painful scream. Opening his reddish-black eyes wide, Yued glared at the moonlight sword. With Yued's fragile mind, making a decision was impossible. However, the spirit that corroded Yued's mind pushed his body forward with malice. "If only you weren't here." Yued screamed. The giant hands that protected Yued's body opened up. In spite of being cut apart by the moonlight, the fingers sprung forth at Eugene. No, they were not fingers anymore. The darkness filled with a desire to kill Eugene rushed over him, but it was scattered away by the increasingly bright moonlight. Eugene didn't answer Yued's frantic scream. His chest muscles were stiff and his heart ached. Quite some time had passed since Eugene had started Ignition. He hadn't struggled in this fight, but he had used an overwhelming amount of power compared to when he had fought Barong. "I'm getting tired," Eugene murmured as he moved forward. He hadn't finished using Ignition yet. When he wished to speed up, all his mana sparked up in reply, enabling him to spring forward like lightning. The darkness rushing in was ominous enough to crush people as soon as it touched them, but Eugene's flame pushed away the darkness. "If only..." Yued kept whimpering. Eugene quickly closed the distance between him and Yuid. Different types of magic spells crossed Yuid's mind. He could use them to ride out the current situation. Yes, Yuid had a bunch of magic he hadn't used yet. Hadn't he longed for this kind of magic ever since he was little? If he sacrificed Eugene, he would learn much greater magic than now. What should I do? Yuid wondered. Right now there was one thing the Yuid severely lacked: the ability to make a judgment during combat. He couldn't crush Eugene with his power, and using magic without any plan was meaningless. However, Yuid wasn't good at making a choice. He had been desperate to learn magic since he was little but had no talent in magic that he so desperately craved. Yet he had never tried hard enough to compensate for his shortcomings. That was why it was too late for Yuid to win. With the moonlight sword, Eugene pierced Yuid's heart. Even before Yuid moaned, the moonlight sword shone. The pale moonlight lit up inside Yuid's body. His mouth opened wide but he couldn't scream. The moonlight was enough to destroy the man's fragile mind. His very existence had been stained by the darkness, but the moonlight lit up the darkness, obliterating it. Whoosh! Yuid's limbs turned to ashes, disappearing. With cold eyes, Eugene watched Yuid crumble into dust. The thought of asking Yuid about any last words crossed Eugene's mind, but he stayed quiet in the end. He just watched Yuid die. Yuid's black eyes were returning to their original color, and his face was contorted from fear and pain. Waving his arms in the air, Yuid opened and closed his mouth several times. Eugene forcibly moved his left arm to hold the holy sword. The light from the moonlight sword was already killing Yuid, but Eugene shoved the holy sword into Yuid's chest as well to ensure that he died. Whoosh! The light dimmed. Gasping for breath, Eugene put down the moonlight sword and the holy sword. The annihilation hammer held in Yuid's hand fell to the ground. Without leaving a trace, Yuid crumbled into dust. Staying in midair for a moment, Eugene caught his breath. It felt like his heart was going to burst and his whole body ached. However, he couldn't rest now. The fight wasn't really over yet. Continuing to catch his breath, Eugene looked down at the ground. The ground was originally covered with the darkness summoned by the annihilation hammer and the demon's spear. Underneath the darkness was the forest with bumpy grounds. However, only a giant hole remained on the ground now. With nonchalant eyes, Eugene followed the trail that his fight left, searching for his target. The demon's spear, which fell first, was at the bottom of the hole. The annihilation hammer was next to the hole. Hector. Eugene crumpled up his face as he couldn't find Hector Lionheart. The last time Eugene had seen Hector was when he was lying unconscious behind Dominic. Had he dissipated into dust in the middle of Eugene and Yuid's battle? Or else did he run? Eugene wondered. Strangely, Hector had a pretty strong artifact. Maybe he also had a way to escape from this darkness. Clicking his tongue, Eugene slowly came down to the ground. Hamel, it won't be a wise move to hold. Tempest cautioned. Those idiots had been using it, so I'm sure I will be able to use it. Eugene chuckled as he reached out his hand for the demon's spear. 300 years ago, Hamel and Molin wanted to become the owner of the annihilation hammer and the demon's spear. Hamel tried holding it several times, but every time he did, he felt like he was going to go insane. So, in the end, he gave up on being the owner of those weapons. Was he not worthy enough? The thought had crossed Hamel's mind. The demon's spear, the annihilation hammer, and the moonlight sword only accepted Vermouth as their owners, not accepting anyone else. Only Vermouth could use those ridiculously strong weapons. Hamel and Molin were also strong, but they weren't as strong as Vermouth. If someone needed to meet special qualifications to become the owner of the legendary weapons, only Vermouth met those qualifications. Hamel had thought so 300 years ago, but Eugene didn't think so right now. The council had owned the demon's spear. The annihilation hammer was owned by Dominic. Were they more qualified than Hamel and Molin? If qualifications meant talent, then absolutely not. The only thing that made Doynes and Dominic more special than Hamel and Molin was their lineage as the great Vermouth's descendants. Even the moonlight sword, Eugene thought. He could now hold and swing the awful sword with ease, maybe because he had reincarnated as Vermouth's descendant. Eugene stood in front of the demon's spear. The ominous spear was tenaciously emitting darkness, dyeing the ground black. After glaring at it for a moment, Eugene unhesitatingly reached out to grab the demon's spear. Trembling, the demon's spear in Eugene's hand howled. His head spun, his mind was confused. He was in more pain than he had been when his left arm was crushed by Yuad's attack. As he gritted his teeth to stop screaming, Eugene pulled out the demon's spear stuck into the ground. He came out of the hole and approached the annihilation hammer. "Sir Eugene? You are okay, right?" Mare asked in fear. Without answering Mare, Eugene extended his crushed left hand and grabbed the annihilation hammer. When he grabbed the hammer, Eugene's view was covered with darkness, but he wasn't surprised. Glaring at the darkness, he took a step forward. The darkness shook hard as it gathered up in one place. Although it didn't have a specific form, this ominous darkness made every living being instinctively shudder. Eugene was familiar with this darkness. The darkness spirit had previously existed in two pieces. One was in the demon's spear and another in the annihilation hammer. However, the pieces now united and became one darkness spirit. The spirit was the remnant of the two demon kings, the demon king of carnage and the demon king of cruelty. When he became conscious of the remnant, Eugene's mind became unstable again. Staggering, Eugene grabbed his head. The truth of black magic, which had made Yuad be in the raptures of happiness, was about to be engraved in Eugene's mind. However, this engraving wasn't the same as accumulating knowledge. If that truth remained in his mind, the darkness spirit would take over his body, regardless of Eugene's will. It meant that Eugene would become a representative of the demon kings, whom he hated with all his heart. On top of that, the demon kings had already died 300 years ago. "Get lost," Eugene spoke harshly as he took one more step forward. Whoosh! The white flame wrapped around Eugene. As he kept marching on, the flame mane around Eugene flew in the air. He dropped the annihilation hammer and the demon's spear. Before they touched the ground, Eugene pulled out the holy sword and the moonlight sword from the cloak. Eugene had no intention of tolerating the existence of that ominous, horrible being, much less using its power. The converging pale moonlight and holy light lit up the darkness. Seal Lionheart was intoxicated, but she didn't experience hallucinations. It had already been 3 years since she started to train as a black lion. She never skipped her drug tolerance training, so her tolerance was pretty high. Her mind wasn't fragile either. However, her body was powerless, her mind was groggy. The darkness spirit not only shackled Seal but all sacrificial offerings. The spirit then dragged their minds into deep darkness. Everything felt like a dream, but Seal knew what had happened wasn't a dream. So it didn't seem real. She couldn't interfere, only able to watch. She saw a reality that felt like a dream. "Where is Eugene?" Seal asked with trembling lips. It was difficult for her to speak. Her head ached and her body felt heavy like wet cotton. Her eyes kept closing on their own, so Seal forced them to stay open. Among the people who had been captured as sacrificial offerings, Seal was the first to regain consciousness. "He is okay, right?" She pressed her uncle, Guillaume Lionheart, for an answer. With worried eyes, her uncle looked down at her, unable to pull himself together. Guillaume had realized something was going on in the forest. After he discovered that a large amount of demonic energy was accumulated elsewhere besides the center of the forest, the entire Black Lion Order marched into the forest. Dominic knew the Black Lion Knights well. They were too obsessed to make only the Lionhearts as the Black Lion Knights. As a result of their obsession, there wasn't a single priest or a paladin in the Black Lion Knightly Order. The barrier had been meticulously made by the Demon King's remnant and was truly powerful. However, since the Black Lion Knights didn't have the Holy Sword and the Moonlight Sword, it was impossible for them to break the barrier. Even the captains on watch duty gathered up in one place to break through the barrier, but it wasn't easy to break this kind of barrier with pure physical force. Guillaume included, the Black Lions hadn't arrived at the scene of the incident because they had been able to break through the barrier. No, they had arrived because the barrier had been destroyed when a brilliant light filled the darkness. "He is injured, though." Guillaume nodded, heaving a long sigh. After hearing his answer, Seal raised her head with difficulty and searched for Eugene. With a haggard face, Eugene was sitting down on the ground. His bloody left arm was a mess. It wouldn't have been strange for Eugene to have fainted already. Instead, he looked the same as he did when the semi-conscious Seal saw him inside the barrier. "Are you okay?" Seal spoke with a trembling voice. Her voice was small, but Eugene heard her. Looking at Seal, Eugene grinned. "Do I look okay to you?" He was not gonna lie, he wasn't fine. Without Christina, Eugene would take at least a week to recover from his left arm injury and the internal injury he had sustained as a rebound from ignition. Don't try to stay awake. Just sleep, Eugene suggested to Seal. I'm fine. I know you are not okay. It's all over, so you don't need to stay awake. I want to say something to you. Seal didn't change her mind. She could finally relax, but she was beginning to choke up with emotions. Thinking that this was how she would die, she was scared. Although she wished someone would come and save her, at the same time she also wished for no one to come. Yet neither of her desperate wishes had come true. Cyan, Garjith, Desra and Genya had come one by one, and failed to save her. Everyone had been overpowered and captured by the darkness. However, Eugene hadn't come. Despite everything, she thought that it was fortunate. She hoped that Eugene had run away and gone outside the forest to ask for help. With the smell of blood filling her nose as Yuad drew the magic circle, Seal had gradually become unconscious. Then when she was about to faint, she saw Eugene's flame. You saved me, Seal quietly spoke after she calmed herself. Don't say it now. Eugene shot her down. Why? Thank me later. I'm going to hear it when you and I are both fine. You can say thank you then, very politely. No, I don't want to. Hear it now. No, I'm not gonna hear it now. You can thank me 100 times now, but I'm not going to hear it, Eugene said with a cheeky smile. Chapter 148. The Remnant 5. Won't it be better to just die than be in this much pain? Eugene seriously wondered as he lay in bed. Every time he so much as lifted a finger, his entire body was in such pain that Eugene had to grit his teeth to not scream. His body was so tightly wrapped with bandages that he felt stuffy. He was on so many medicines that smelled so disgusting they hurt his nostrils. It wasn't Eugene's first time experiencing a rebound from ignition. He had felt it in his past life too. However, Eugene was certain that the current rebound hurt the most. Even with his past life included, he had never been in this much pain. Arg, Eugene groaned, gritting his teeth again. He had just lifted a finger, but he felt like someone was shattering his bones with an ice pick. The damn lightning flame was why he was in so much pain right now. The lightning flame significantly increased ignition's power, but the rebound also became significantly stronger. As a result, Eugene's muscles were in extreme pain. Although he had trained, his body couldn't handle the rebound from the upgraded ignition. If you are now going to use ignition and the lightning flame together, then should we call it thunder ignition? Mare asked, sitting on a rocking chair beside Eugene's bed. Putting down the book she was reading, Mare stared at Eugene with twinkling eyes. Or is it lightning ignition? I might really kill you someday, Eugene spoke as he glared back. I think the name ignition is really cool, but the version you use right now is different. It's on another level altogether, so shouldn't you change its name? Mare Mermerdian, I'm really gonna kill you. My name isn't Mare Mermerdian. Oh fuck. Ignition is my technique and I use it. Why are you trying to get under my skin by coming up with new names? Think of it as necessary advice. Mare pouted as she got down from her chair. If you give your techniques really embarrassing names, you might not use that brainlessly dangerous technique anymore because you would be too embarrassed. You sound just like Sienna. She used to talk just like you, telling me to stop using ignition. Eugene grumbled, frowning. I had to use ignition in that situation. Yeah, it fucking hurts right now, but I don't regret using it. I will continue to use it in the future when the situation demands me to. If I don't, I will just regret it afterward. I don't really know what pain is, but people are bound to hesitate if they know that they are going to be in pain, Mare muttered, staring at the floor. I don't hesitate. If I decide to do something, I always do it. Besides, it won't hurt much the next time I use it. As my body adapts to lightning flash, the severity of the rebound will drop back to normal. So is it lightning flash ignition then? Mare swiftly raised her head. I can't move right now because I'm in pain, so would you please knock yourself on the head? Unlike you, I don't have a masochistic hobby of overtaxing my body or making myself suffer. Mare puffed her cheeks in frustration, sitting on the edge of Eugene's bed. For a moment she looked at Eugene, feeling bad for him. He wouldn't suffer any aftereffects as he usually recovered very quickly. There were no elixirs available in the Black Lion Castle, but there were many expensive, effective potions. Since Eugene had received proper first aid, his left arm would completely recover after a week of bed rest. Although Eugene was in such extreme pain that he thought it would be better to die, he would feel much better after a couple of days in bed. Mare also knew that, But that didn't mean she could be nonchalant about Eugene's injury. What if Sir Eugene never recovers and he has to spend his entire life in bed? What if he sustains irrecoverable injuries in a difficult fight like the last one? Or dies during the fight? Mare nervously thought. Clicking this tongue, Eugene said, "Stop thinking about the worst scenarios. It brings bad luck." Huh? How did you know? Can you read my mind? You are an open book. I can't help but worry. I don't like to see you suffering. I'd hate to see you die even more. You really think of me as a maniac, huh? Do you think I like suffering and dying? Stop chattering. Just come and cut me an apple. I don't know how to cut it. Are you never gonna do it because you don't know how? There can be stuff you are bad at or don't know how to do. But you still have to try and practice in order to be good at it. Okay, geezer. Mare pouted, looking at a fruit basket sitting on Eugene's bedside table. Genos and Guillaume had brought the basket while Eugene was unconscious. Geezer. Eugene couldn't really refute Mare, but he still felt a strange sense of incompatibility. Including his age from his past life, Eugene was over 60 years. His body had changed but his soul hadn't, so it wasn't technically wrong to call him an old man, was it? However, the young girl who had just called him geezer merely looked like a young girl. Wasn't she actually a 200-year-old familiar? Preposterous. My personality is that of a youthful mademoiselle. Mare spoke like a character in an old novel. What is up with your way of talking? Eugene mumbled with a disgusted face. Mare dramatically stuck her tongue out at Eugene. Then she picked up a big apple and started peeling it with a paring knife that was as small as her palm. Knock knock. While Mare was having trouble peeling an apple, someone knocked on the door to Eugene's room. It was Genos. Come in, Eugene answered. Genos entered the room and looked back and forth between Mare, who looked serious as she held the paring knife, and the bunch of apple skins with a lot of apple flesh still attached that fell on the floor. Let me do it, Genos offered. I don't need to know how to neatly peel off an apple while I live because I don't need to eat apples. On top of that, you don't need to peel off apples when you make an apple pie or apple juice, Mare quickly said. Eugene wasn't sure if she was making up excuses or just randomly babbling. Mare handed Genos the paring knife, and Genos skillfully sliced the apple as he spoke. The council head. No, Sir Doynes regained his consciousness. Is it fortunate news? The Black Lions and the Council of Elders may think so, but Sir Doynes doesn't think his survival is good news. The first thing he said after he regained his consciousness was, "Why did you save me?" Genos put down the paring knife as he bitterly smiled. There was a plate full of bunny-shaped apple slices in front of him. Mare swiftly picked up a slice and ate it. It's impossible to save him anyway, Eugene said calmly. Yes, Sir Doynes refuses any further treatment. But, he says he wants to hear the whole story from you and express his remorse, senior brother. Remorse, huh? Eugene thought as he made a sour face. The council head wasn't the one who had requested Barong to kill Eugene. It was Dominic. However, the council head wasn't blameless. He had talked too much to his grandson. Of course, this incident would still have happened even if the council head had kept his mouth shut. Dominic, Hector and Euid's conspiracy had nothing to do with Barong trying to assassinate Eugene. Dominic had done that on his own. When? Eugene reluctantly asked. If you are okay with it, I will bring him here right now, Genos eagerly spoke. I don't mind, but wouldn't it be better for me to go? I'm asking a dying grandpa with a hole in his chest to come. Your injury is also severe, senior brother. And the council head insisted that he should be the one to visit you. Why is he insisting? Genos didn't answer, hesitating a bit. After checking whether or not the door was closed, he also checked if anyone was eavesdropping. I don't know the exact reason, but I have some ideas. Ideas? Eugene asked, tilting his head in confusion. You have told me the whole story of the recent incident. Genos began to speak, carefully choosing his next words. Before losing consciousness due to the rebound from ignition, Eugene desperately held on and told the whole story to Genos. It included everything from the darkness spirit, which turned out to be the remnant of demon kings, Euid running amok and Dominic and Hector's betrayal. I know you are strong, senior brother. But, no matter how strong you are still young. It's impossible to kill Dominic, Hector and Euid, particularly since they were together with the demon king's remnant. But I did kill them. Yes, you did. On top of that, the enemies were using the annihilation hammer and the demon spear, but the only injury you sustained was a fracture in your left arm. The reason you are on bed rest is that you are experiencing a rebound from using ignition. Genos stopped speaking for a moment. Then swallowing hard he stared at Eugene. Senior brother. Who are you? You have found Sir Hamel's grave which no one found before you. Although you have told me that was where you found Sir Hamel's secret manual. It isn't enough to explain how you can be so strong. I know how nonsensical this sounds, but I have fought you, senior brother. While we fought using the Hamel style, you used Azura Rampage and Lightning Counter so proficiently. Genos desperately explained. Stop. Eugene raised his hand, heaving a long sigh. Above all else, Eugene really couldn't hear Genos saying Azura Rampage and Lightning Counter. He could see Mare holding back her laughter after finishing half the apples on the plate. I get what you are thinking right now, junior brother. Yes, I see where the council head is coming from. Eugene nodded very slightly. He could deny their claims by making up excuses, but Eugene didn't want to do that. Although he tried to sit as upright as possible, he could feel his injured body refusing to move. In the end, Eugene raised his head as high as he could as he lay on the bed and looked at Genos. I am Hamel, Eugene said in a not-so-solemn way. He had previously thought that if he was going to reveal his identity, he would do it more seriously in a situation that would suit the hero from 300 years ago. However, he now figured it would be more embarrassing to postpone this moment only to do whatever magnificent reveal later. I knew it. Silently urged by Mare, Genos had been cutting apples into bunny-shaped slices, but he instantly sprang up from his seat when he heard what Eugene said. He immediately put down the paring knife and apple, then kneeled in front of Eugene. Genos didn't doubt Eugene. Instead, he felt much better after hearing this. A 20-year-old man being that unbelievably strong, it would have actually been more ridiculous to think that Eugene had become that strong solely based on his inborn talent. Above all, if the hero from 300 years ago had reincarnated or possessed Eugene, Genos was now able to serve and respect Eugene as his senior brother without being embarrassed or complaining. Of course, Genos didn't have complaints about calling Eugene his senior brother, but he was still a bit embarrassed. If senior brother is Sir Hamel, it is only right to serve and respect him. Even Genos had a hard time respecting a man younger than his daughter. No, if he is Sir Hamel, then isn't it actually wrong to call him senior brother? When the thought crossed his mind, Genos trembled, feeling a shiver down his spine. Teacher. Genos spoke with teary eyes. As the heir of Hamel style, he couldn't help but shed tears of joy. He was enjoying the great honor of calling the great hero his teacher. How am I your teacher? Eugene said with a sour face. Everyone in the clan considers you our teacher, Sir Hamel. But, well, technically I never accepted you guys as my disciples. So why would you guys call me your teacher on your own? You have taught me the new, correct Hamel style, teacher. Why are you refusing to be called a teacher when you have accepted me as your junior brother and told me to call you senior brother? Genos spoke with a hint of anger. All right, don't get angry now. Eugene heaved a big sigh. Tell the council head to come to visit me. Or shall I go? No, I will go. Please stay in bed. After neatly wiping off the tears on his face, Genos stood up. When Genos left the room, Mare also quietly stood up and lifted the cloak of darkness. I will be inside the cloak. If you were going to go in, you could have gone in sooner. Why would you go in only after eating all the apples? I only ate it because you didn't, Sir Eugene. Did you know that peeled-off apples turn brown over time? They look hideous. That is called the browning process. Is that so? To stop the browning process, you have to put the apple slices in salt water or sugar water. It's interesting, right? Lady Ancilla told me, but I prefer sugar water to salt water. Salt water is too salty. Are you going in or what? Eugene asked in annoyance. Mare sheepishly smiled and crawled into the cloak. Leaning against the bed's headboard, Eugene organized his thoughts. It had been 2 days since Uid had run amok. Just like Eugene, the people who had been captured as sacrificial offerings were still on bed rest. According to Guillaume, they would be able to recover by the next day at the latest. The bodies of Uid, Dominic and Hector hadn't been recovered. There was nothing to recover anyway. The only body found in the forest was of Deacon Lionheart. Deacon's body had been laid in a coffin, and Carmen's brother, Klein Lionheart, visited Deacon's family to deliver his body. Gilead had been notified of the events, but even though he wanted to return, he had to stay at the palace for the time being. The Black Lion, dispatched to the Bossar family, was found dead in their mansion's warehouse. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only body that was found. Over 100 dead bodies were found inside the mansion. Tanis, Count Bossar, and the servants. They were all rotting. They had also found a diary in Yuad's room. However, no one had checked the diary's contents. It was because Carmen, who had been dispatched to protect the main house, had threatened everyone to not check the diary before Gilead, Yuad's father, and the patriarch. It's absolute fuckery right now, Eugene thought, his head aching. The council head won't be able to recover, so he must have delivered his will to the council of elders. He will probably die after he apologizes to me. People were still sorting out the situation. Yuad and Dominic had died. No one could confirm Hector's death. Dominic and Hector's families had already been arrested by the Black Lions. Although Eugene wasn't sure what the Black Lions would gain from interrogating their family members, he was sure about one thing. The Lionheart clan's reputation was in the gutter now. On top of that, the Black Lions' reputation had been trashed and dragged in the mud. They were too helpless in the recent incident. Carmen Lionheart. She would probably become the council head. After Doyne's Lionheart's death, Carmen Lionheart would become the highest-ranking elder. But she would never want that, considering her personality. She still wants to work in the field. Then would Klein Lionheart become the next council head? Klein lacked dignity, but he didn't seem to be a bad person. What would happen to the main family? I'm guessing the patriarch would resign to take responsibility for raising a Wus son. Then is Sion going to be the next patriarch right away? Or is it going to be Guillaume? But they wouldn't make the second son patriarch, especially since he has already become a collateral family member. Guillaume wouldn't want to become a patriarch either. Frowning, Eugene sighed. There was one thing that troubled Eugene. Too much spotlight was on him right now. Even Genos had doubts about Eugene's real identity, so it was safe to assume the council head was probably thinking the same. I'll just tell the patriarch that I was able to do all that because of the holy sword. While he was entertaining these thoughts, he heard a knock. Come in, Eugene answered. The door opened right away. Eugene was expecting Donyes to be in a wheelchair or have someone help him walk. However, Doynes walked in without any support. Still, looking at how Doynes was practically forcing himself to keep his eyes open, Eugene could see that the man was dying. Donie's face was livid and his cheeks were hollow. As for the hole in his chest, Eugene couldn't see anything because Donyes was wearing a uniform to cover it. Is it okay for you to move around like that? Eugene cautiously asked. Even though he was staggering, Donyes walked on his own. After he closed the door, he stared at Eugene for a moment, then bowed his head. It's an honor to meet the great Hamel. He is not even asking me whether or not I am Hamel, Eugene thought as he reluctantly nodded. I am also, glad to meet my friend's Descendant. Chapter 149. Bedside Visits 1. The awkwardness was unbearable. If he hadn't been so injured, he would have at least been able to turn his head away or adjust his posture. But right now for Eugene, moving anything below his neck was a daunting challenge. So Eugene could only keep up an awkward expression while staring at the crown of Doynes's head as the man bowed to him deeply, with the utmost respect. That's, in your poor state of health. Why don't you stop that and take a seat? Eugene recommended. I'm fine like this. Doynes rejected the offer. No, what do you mean by I'm fine? Didn't you get stabbed through the chest? Let me just say, as someone who also had a hole pierced through his chest, I'm very familiar with what it feels like. Eugene rambled awkwardly as he recalled the memories of his past life. It's a very shitty and hollow feeling, isn't it? Well, the hole that ran me through may have been larger, but still. I wasn't able to walk around like you and I just had to lie there waiting for death, you know? How amazing, came the response from Doynes. Embarrassed by the words he had spewed out, Eugene coughed awkwardly. I wasn't trying to brag that my chest hole was bigger. Eugene stiffly apologized as he desperately tried to shake loose the fixation with chest holes rattling around inside his head, but it wasn't going the way he wanted it to. If you really thought about it, having a hole through the chest was an injury with many connotations for Eugene. His death in his previous life had also been due to a hole in his chest, and Sienna, still sealed in the World Tree, also had a hole in her chest. Didn't I tell you to stop standing there and take a seat? My body isn't in great shape either, so having to look up at you standing there is a bit difficult, Eugene complained. Yes, Doynes agreed and without any further attempts at refusal, sat down on a chair near the bed. As the distance between them shortened, Eugene was better able to feel the aura of death lingering around Doynes. How much time do you have left? Eugene asked. I won't make it through the night, Doynes answered in a calm voice. If you summon a high priest from the Holy Empire, there's still a possibility that you could be saved, or perhaps we can call for the saint, Eugene proposed. I'm the one who knows my own body the best, Doynes refuted. Even the blessing of the saint won't be able to revitalize this body of mine. There was no change in Doynes' expression as he continued to speak. This current situation, it's evidence of how incompetent the Lionheart clan, no, the Black Lions, have become. We were so arrogant and drunk on the honor of being the descendants of a great hero that we weren't able to properly live up to the demands of our position. You've realized this far too late, Eugene chided. It's because the world has been too peaceful, Doynes said regretfully. What's ridiculous is the fact that Vermouth's descendants have become so drunk on peace. If my body was healthy and I still had the strength that I used to have in the old days, I would have made all of you arrogant Black Lions kneel down and then beaten you with a paddle, Eugene threatened. My apologies, Doynes said as he bowed his head once more. Allow me to take the guilt of that sin with me when I pass. Any further mockery will only fuel the discontent of the younger generation. So please, I hope you keep this fact in mind and take care of us. You're not asking me to join the Black Lions, are you? Eugene asked skeptically. Doynes shook his head as he said, I'm well aware that the Black Lions are far too small to retain you, Sir Hamill. However, as Sir Hamill does have a relationship connecting himself to the Black Lions, I hope you can watch over the changes in the Black Lion Knights, even if it's from a distance. Changes, you say? Eugene smacked his lips and tilted his head curiously. Stop being so vague and tell me, what exactly are you going to change? The Black Lion Castle will be opening its doors. Its doors. As you may be aware, Sir Hamill, the Black Lions aren't a place one can join just because they want to. The restrictions are relatively looser for any member of the main family who wishes to join, but for a collateral descendant to become a Black Lion, they must first possess skills that we can't help but recognize. That's right. From now on, if there is a child who wishes to become a Black Lion among the collateral descendants attending a bloodline continuation ceremony, they can be brought directly to the castle for further training. The bloodline continuation ceremony itself is the problem, Eugene interrupted as his face twisted in a scowl. The changes that you're talking about will, in the end, only increase the number of Black Lions in the next generation. While that might indeed be good in terms of boosting the clan's power, even if the quality decreases a little, the increase in quantity more than makes up for it, and even if it means teaching a dunce from a young age, they should still be of some use. However, as long as the tradition of the bloodline continuation ceremony remained, any other changes would be inadequate. In the aftermath of this incident, didn't you say that a couple of the collateral branches have suspiciously gone missing at the same time? This fact shows us that this treasonous affair arose from the dissatisfaction that the collateral descendants bear towards the main family. And where does this dissatisfaction come from? It's all because of that idiotic bloodline continuation ceremony, Eugene criticized. Doynes hesitated. However, the bloodline continuation ceremony is our great ancestors. That bastard Vermouth must have been senile, Eugene burst out. Unable to control his anger, he unconsciously tried to leap to his feet. Of course, the moment he tried to exert any strength with his body, he had to restrain himself from screaming at the terrible pain coursing through his whole body. Frankly, the tradition wasn't completely incomprehensible. Vermouth had taken more than 10 wives and had had dozens of children. Among his many children, the most outstanding child had become the family's next patriarch. But what about after that? This left behind numerous siblings who hadn't been able to become the patriarch. The situation would have been neatly tied up if the next patriarch had just conducted a purge, but it would have been ridiculous for the children of a hero to fight among each other, killing their own siblings. In the end, the first generation all passed away and the numerous siblings also gave birth to multiple children once more. The problem began from there. Vermouth had died, leaving behind his legacy the great hero's Lionheart clan. And the collateral families that hadn't become the main family tried to inherit the great legacy and gain glory. The bloodline continuation ceremony was necessary, Doynes insisted after letting out a long sigh. The bloodline continuation ceremony ensured that the main family kept its unique stature and prevented any collateral families from overpowering it. If it weren't for the bloodline continuation ceremony, the clan as a whole might have disappeared long ago due to infighting. I know, Eugene acknowledged as he relaxed his expression. Vermouth, that bastard. He must have created the bloodline continuation ceremony because he had his own reasons for doing so. As for what that reason was, thoughts that Eugene didn't want to think kept unfolding in his head. Along with the main family's white flame formula, the coercive tradition of the bloodline continuation ceremony had ensured the main family's superiority. For the past 300 years, this had allowed the main family to amass strength that couldn't be surpassed, even as the collateral branches gradually increased in numbers. If there had been no bloodline continuation ceremony, and the white flame formula had been passed to all Lionheart descendants, then would the Lionheart clan really look like it did now? Everyone would receive the same treatment, but only one of them got to be specially referred to as the main family. Would the other branches, apart from the direct line, really recognize them as the main family? Perhaps, like Doins had said, the Lionheart clan may have immediately fragmented due to infighting. And what about now? Multiple factors ensured that the collateral branches could not overcome the direct line's superiority. The main family's unique status, storing all of Vermouth's heirlooms except for the Moonlight Sword in the main family's treasure vault, and inheriting the white flame formula in its perfect form, along with the use of the special ley line. All of this had guaranteed the main family's continued existence for these past 300 years, as well as its ability to control the growing number of collateral branches. But all of that for what reason? Was it really all for the clan's honor? Eugene asked himself uncertainly. Vermouth had been involved in Hamel's reincarnation. Eugene had been able to confirm that through his meeting with Sienna. Hamel's soul had been sealed inside the necklace that Sienna had kept with her ever since he died as Hamel's memento. Vermouth had stolen that necklace from Sienna. Vermouth, if you intended for me to be reincarnated as a Lionheart. Eugene didn't know how exactly his reincarnation had been accomplished. However, a few things stood out glaringly when he thought about it in simple terms. The body he had been reincarnated into was superior to the body from his previous life. No, it was so far superior that it even stood out among the Lionhearts. In order to guarantee that he would be born in a body as excellent as this, the most convenient method would be to first increase the total number of descendants. It's just a guess, but what if it's the truth? Had Vermouth purposefully increased the number of his descendants in order to give Hamel the best body possible? In order to preserve the core of the Lionheart clan's strength, Vermouth had made sure that the main family was special. And what if Hamel was reincarnated as a collateral descendant? That still wouldn't be a problem. As long as the foundation of his body was excellent, with the memories of his previous life to draw from, Hamel would definitely grow strong enough that he would eventually be able to suppress the main family. Things had somehow gone so well that Eugene had been adopted into the main family and had even inherited the white flame formula. But, even if that hadn't happened, he could still have somehow trampled the main family and claimed all of the main family's power for himself. Get rid of the bloodline continuation ceremony, Eugene muttered with a sigh. There's no more need for it. It also led to the current problem. If we just get rid of the bloodline continuation ceremony, most of the complaints from the collateral lines will disappear. Doins still hesitated, but, are you still going to be stubborn even though it led to you getting stabbed in the back? Hamel asked scornfully. Like you said, the world has been so peaceful that even the Lionhearts have become incompetent idiots. However, now things won't be as peaceful. You never know when Helmuth might declare the start of the war, and the collateral descendants harboring a grudge against the main family have all disappeared. Doins listened silently. It's a good time for a change, Eugene insisted as he glared at Doins. If you're going to die before the end of the day, then you should leave a will before closing your eyes. You are the immortal White Lion after all. Your death may not be the most honorable, but your name still holds sway over the other elders. So if you abolish the bloodline continuation ceremony in your will, even the elders won't be able to raise any strong objections to it. No one wants to be the first to say it, but they all know that this situation arose because of this fucking tradition rotting the clan from the inside. Doins didn't respond immediately. While Doins closed his eyes and pondered the matter for a few moments, Eugene snickered and continued speaking. Actually, who am I to try to pressure you into this? You don't need to leave a will if you don't want to. Because after you die I'll take this mess apart and try to fix it on my own. Of course, it would have to be a rough fix that wouldn't really compare to a will left by the immortal white lion, but what can you do? Doins burst into laughter at this blatant threat. To receive advice from not just anyone but from a hero who lived 300 years ago. Right, I understand. I'll make sure to leave it in my will. The bloodline continuation ceremony had been a tradition for 300 years. As someone who had lived for 120 years, Doins was a living witness to the history of the Lionheart clan. As a former member of the main family, he had been one of the beneficiaries of the bloodline continuation ceremony. Therefore, denying the bloodline continuation ceremony felt the same as denying the foundation of the Lionheart clan, which he had held such pride in for his entire life. However, it needed to be done. Doins acknowledged just how much of a disgraceful affair this incident had been and also recognized that the grandson who had stabbed him through the chest hadn't felt the same sense of pride that he did. My grandson, Dominic, did he die with regrets? Doins asked. There shouldn't have been any room for regret, Eugene replied thoughtfully. That's disappointing, Doins chuckled before continuing. I wanted him to die while regretting his choices and actions. But if he died without even having any chance to feel regret, doesn't that mean his death was so painful that he couldn't spare any thoughts for regret? It was quite a terrible death, Eugene agreed. But the deaths of those who covet what they do not deserve and fall to evil are always terrible. I owe you a great debt, Sir Hamel, Doins said as he got up once more and deeply bowed his head to Eugene. At the same time, I have committed a great many sins. If Sir Hamel hadn't stopped them there, all the children of the main family would have been offered up as sacrifices. And you would have been completely possessed by the remnants of the demon kings. For the descendant of the great Lionheart who slayed the demon kings, to be used as a tool to revive those same demon kings. Such a thing could never be allowed to happen. Eugene coughed. Now that I think about it, it doesn't seem like they would really have been reborn, since they were just some remnants. In other words, it really wasn't all that serious. They were just a couple of scumbags. Eugene had been trying to say all this with a dignified expression, but he had raised his chin a bit too high, and now his neck was throbbing in pain. Strangely enough, the cloak he had left on the sofa appeared to be wriggling. Eugene imagined Mare covering her mouth with her hands as she tried to hold back her laughter inside the cloak. Ahem. By the way, how did you realize the fact that I'm Hamel? Eugene questioned Doins, trying to change the subject. I saw it in a dream, Doins confessed. A dream? Eugene repeated in surprise. That was quite an unexpected answer. After being ambushed by Dominic and collapsing, it seems that my consciousness still had a slight connection to the demon spear. It must have been because it's been in my hand for dozens of years, and it's quite an ominous and mysterious weapon. In this dream, I saw how you drove Dominic to his death, Sir Hamel. Doins paused for a moment as he finished speaking and stared down at his own hand. His one remaining hand was trembling in fear just from imagining the scene he had witnessed in the dream. That strength and that technique could never belong to a 20-year-old young man. Also, the rage that you showed at the tomb of our great ancestor was closer to the betrayal that someone would feel towards their friend rather than towards a revered ancestor, Doins explained. Indeed, Eugene muttered with a nod of understanding. When he had discovered that Vermouth's coffin was empty, Eugene hadn't been able to fully restrain his emotions. A sense of betrayal towards Vermouth had taken hold of him and had shaken him to his core. Doins hesitated before continuing. The demon's spear and the annihilation hammer. Mare, Eugene called out without allowing Doins to finish his words. At his call, Mare's head popped out from between the folds of his cloak. Yes, did Sir Eugene, who has been injured to the point where he's unable to move after a fight with a couple of scumbags, call for me? Mare asked teasingly. Watch your words, Eugene warned her. I'm not injured. This is just muscle strain. Mare nodded. Understood. You are suffering from so much muscle strain that you're unable to move after a fight with a couple of scumbags, correct? You're really going to get it once my body is all better, Eugene threatened Mare. Ignoring the threat, Mare asked, so why did you call for me, Sir Eugene, who's only able to move his lips? Get the demon's spear and the annihilation hammer. Out of my cloak, Eugene ground out while holding back the anger boiling away inside of him. Mare just stuck her tongue out at him before popping back inside the cloak. Turning to Doins, Eugene demanded, Did you just laugh? Not at all, Doins denied. I feel like you were laughing though. Eugene accused him. Not at all, Doins repeated. You were laughing on the inside, weren't you? Not at all. By the end of this brief interrogation of an old man who was scheduled to die later today, Mare came out of the cloak dragging the huge demon spear and the annihilation hammer with a strained whimper. Both these weapons were patently larger than her own body. I'm holding on to these. You don't have any complaints, right? Eugene stated as he gestured to the demon spear and the annihilation hammer with his chin. Those were no longer the same former armaments of the Demon Kings. Although their form hadn't changed, the demonic power that had formed the foundations of these weapons had been cleanly erased. Instead, a portion of the lightning flames that flowed through Eugene's body had been poured into the demon's spear and the annihilation hammer. Due to this, Eugene felt like there was a strong possibility of a specific thing pertaining to those weapons. He wasn't able to test this suspicion right away as his body wasn't strong enough. But considering the fact that the lightning flames now resided in the place of the spirit of darkness that had disappeared along with the demonic power, he might not be able to reproduce their special attacks, but it might still be possible to use the demon spear and the annihilation hammer as powerful weapons. Who else could be the master of those weapons if not Sir Hamel? Doins said, having already decided not to show any further resistance to Eugene's words. Though they had only chatted for a while, this great hero from 300 years ago still had the same fiery personality as described in the fairy tale passed down throughout history. I'm sure you have a lot to attend to, Eugene prompted Doins. The aura of death that he had been feeling from Doins had continued to deepen over the course of their conversation. Dominic might have been your only descendant, but, even so, shouldn't you at least say goodbye to the elders you've known for such a long time, Eugene suggested. I also need to prepare a will, Doins agreed with a chuckle as he stood up. Thank you so much for your consideration, Sir Hamel. As a knight, I feel it's a great honor to have met with you like this. If I only had enough time, I would have liked to ask you to regale me with some of your past sagas, Sir Hamel. No way, that would be too embarrassing, Eugene expressed his rejection with a disgusted look as he shook his head. Then, changing the subject, Eugene asked, So, who is going to be the next head of the council? I'm thinking of Carmen, but she probably won't be willing to take the position, Doins admitted. If that's the case, then her younger brother will probably become the council head, Eugene mused. Yes, Doins agreed. Eugene suddenly asked, Is it all right if I make just one request? Please speak freely. Leave the main family out of it. Doins, who had withdrawn respectfully, raised his head to look at Eugene. I mean, you shouldn't pointlessly harass the patriarch over this issue, Eugene specified. Because without anyone adding on to his troubles, he must be the one whose heart is suffering the most right now. Ho ho, Doins chuckled with a faint smile at these words. It's a blessing for the main family that you cherish them like this, Sir Hamel. That said, I have no intention of becoming the patriarch, Eugene insisted cautiously. However, as Sir Hamel cherishes both of the twins and the main family, even if you don't become the patriarch yourself, I'm sure you will lead the main family to unprecedented glory, Doins declared confidently. The only regret that remained in Doins's heart was a desire to see such a sight in person. However, it was impossible to sustain his life and someone had to take responsibility for this situation. So with his death he would ignite the sparks of reform for the clan. My death might be tainted with disgrace, but... There was a bitter smile on Doins's face as he turned to leave and thought to himself, it seems that with my death I can still be of some use to the family. While being called the immortal White Lion, he had lived for 120 years. Yet he had never once imagined that he would actually die like this. However, Doins didn't resent being consigned to such a death. In the end, all of that was inconsequential. With his blind trust in his grandchild and his own arrogance in thinking that everything he did was for the sake of the clan, Doins had dug this grave for himself. Sure, it was an ugly and dishonorable death, but before he died he had learned that a legend from 300 years ago now resided in the Lionheart clan. Doins quietly closed the door behind him. Outside the door, Genos was waiting patiently. Genos approached to offer his support, but Doins shook his head in refusal. Let's go, Doins said. The two then headed off to the round table, where all meetings of the Council of Elders were held. Doins insisted on walking toward the Tower of the Round Table on his own 2 feet in order to leave behind his final will.